Welcome to Advocating for Dads with Jana Jones.
Welcome back to Advocating for Dads with Jana K. Jones. Jana is a North Carolina family law attorney based in Charlotte. She spent more than 15 years helping fathers navigate custody and decision-making disputes with clarity and strategy. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host. Today, we're talking about school choice disputes. Jana will cover what happens when parents can't agree on where a child should attend school and how North Carolina courts handle those disagreements. Welcome, Jana.
Hey there, Lisa. How are you?
I'm well. You know, Jana, in North Carolina, when parents share joint legal custody, who has the authority to decide where a child attends school?
Yeah, so joint legal custody means that both parents have the right to make decisions for the child. And what the court expects is for the parents to come together and have a conversation, go back and forth, present different, options to one another, and hopefully arrive at an agreement or a compromise they can both live with. But if that isn't possible for whatever reason, maybe school choice, for instance, then generally speaking, an order will talk about how tiebreakers are handled. There are a few different options. One is that one parent has final decision-making authority. That means that parent is able to ultimately make the decision if the parties cannot agree after they've had a good faith conversation about it. Another option is going to be mediation, where you are presenting your arguments to a mediator, and that mediator is trying to help you guys come to an agreement. And then another option is arbitration, which is essentially like going to court. There is a family law attorney who acts like a judge, essentially, and you make your arguments to that person, and then they'll make the final call.
So you mentioned arbitration. If one parent wants to change schools and the other disagrees, what options exist before issues reach a courtroom? Is arbitration the only option, or are there other factors at play?
Yeah, so it depends. If these two parents have an order in place, then your order should address legal custody, and it will talk about what happens when there is a dispute between the parents as it relates to legal custody, and if there is any tiebreaker language in there. And so you're following your order. If your order says you must mediate or you must arbitrate, then you must do so. And if your order says that one parent has final decision-making authority, then ultimately that parent gets to make the final choice. If you do not have an order, then you both have a constitutionally protected right as parents to make decisions. And so that is going to come down to who kind of bullies their way into the child going to the school that they want. And it's not an ideal scenario at all.
So if that process doesn't work, what factors do judges typically consider when deciding which school is in the child's best interest?
Sure. So the first thing that the judge is likely going to look at is, how is the school rated? Is this a good school? Is one parent trying to put the child in a school that's highly rated and the other parent is trying to put a child in a school that's not so highly rated? Are extracurriculars important for the child? Are those extracurriculars offered at that school, depending on what their interests are? And then there's going to be the commute, right? Is the school really far away? Is it going to require that the child get up super early or be out really late? And so those are the types of factors that the judge is going to be considering when they're determining who gets final decision-making authority. And that's an important point to make. Generally speaking, a judge is not going to decide where a child goes to school. They're going to decide which parent chooses where the child goes to school. But when you are trying to make an argument to the judge about why parent, should be able to make that decision, then you're using information like, how the school is rated, the extracurriculars that your child wants to be involved in or is involved in, and how the school compares, as well as the commute and other factors.
How does the child's current stability weigh into a courtroom decision? Things like friends, academic progress, or maybe even extracurricular involvement.
Absolutely. It weighs heavily. Generally speaking, the court's not going to be interested in a child switching schools unless it's for the better. So if the child is doing well in a good school, thriving, doing the extracurriculars that they want, getting the grades that they need to get, then the court's going to be a little reluctant to see why that child's school needs to change and really question that parent on what the motivation is for moving schools.
This might seem like a silly question, but does the distance between parents' homes influence school decisions, especially when transportation becomes an issue?
Yeah, I mean, The distance between the parents' homes and the distance between the parents' home and the school, all factor in to what the court's going to perceive to be in the child's best interest. And obviously, the closer the parents live together and the closer they both are to the school, the better. And so, the further apart they are, the more difficult that can become. And so, that can affect your custody determination, right? So, where the child stays. So, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have quite a few suburbs, including some suburbs in the state of South Carolina. So if you have a parent who lives in, say, Rock Hill or Fort Mill, South Carolina, and another parent who lives in Charlotte, and the child goes to Charlotte Mecklenburg schools, depending on the traffic on 77 and 85, it might be very difficult not to have to wake up at the crack of dawn to get your child to school on time. And, not to speak of you trying to get to work and things like that. And that can have an effect on the custody, right? Because if the child is in school and doing well in a CMS school and you are out of state, even if it's kind of a suburb of Charlotte, and that is going to have a major effect on the child and being able to get to school, get to extracurriculars, coming home late, and things of that nature, that can affect the custody determination.
So, Jana, if one parent unilaterally enrolls their child in a new school without agreement, how do the courts usually respond?
It depends. If this is the first time the child is going to be going to school, say we've got a kindergartner, then, obviously you would hope to be in agreement about where you're enrolling the child, but this is just the first school that they're going to. And now a precedent has been set if they've gotten any amount of time going ahead and going to school. And, those years are super important and critical, and you want stability for the child, especially as they're getting acclimated to this new normal for themselves. And so the court's going to be reluctant to pull that child out of school and put them in another school because that's probably going to offer even more disruption for the child than allowing them to remain in the school where one of the parents unilaterally enrolled them.
Can tuition costs for private school or specialized programs become part of a child's support or custody dispute?
So generally speaking, tuition for like a private school is going to be considered under the extraordinary expenses in a child support worksheet calculation. Which worksheet you're on depends on what your custody arrangement is. Generally speaking, there's three worksheets, but the two most common ones are worksheet A and worksheet B. Worksheet A applies when one parent has primary custody and the other parent has visitation. And worksheet B applies when both parents have at least 123 overnights or more per year with the child or children, and that's considered shared custody or joint custody. So you're plugging that amount and whichever parent is paying it in to that worksheet to then determine what the child support obligation is going to be, along with the gross incomes of both parties, as well as work-related child care expenses and health insurance premiums for the children only.
We've talked a lot about different nuances regarding this. Without sharing any confidential details, can you maybe walk us through a situation where parents disagreed over school placement and explain what ultimately made the difference in the outcome?
Yeah, so there have been many times that I've had cases where parents have, disagreed about which school the child should go to. I would say the most determining factor is, are they already enrolled in the school? So if they're already enrolled in the school and they're doing well, it is highly unlikely that the court is going to agree to move the school. If they're already enrolled in the school and they're not doing well, and the new school will provide something that maybe the current school is lacking, then the court's probably more inclined to consider the new school. But again, generally speaking, the judge is not going to pick the school. The judge is going to determine which parent gets the final decision-making authority about a school. Because what the court wants to see is that the parents are conferring and speaking to each other to discuss and determine what is going to be best for their child. And then if ultimately through those discussions they can't come to a consensus, then one parent is going to have that final decision-making authority.
Where do the kids' decisions come into play here? We've talked a lot about the judge and the arbitrators and both parents. Do children ever get a say in where they want to go to school?
Generally speaking, no. A parent can try to confer what it is that their child is saying that they want to do. And I would say that the court is going to take it into consideration, but it's not going to be a determining factor. Ultimately, it is the parents' responsibilities to determine where the child or children go to school. And so the court expects to hear from the parents about why they're arguing for a particular position or the ability to make that decision, that final decision-making authority, based on facts and evidence, as opposed to just what the child is saying that they want.
I can see that with younger kids for sure, but as kids become teenagers and they become more dedicated to their school and fans of their school and have athletic things that they're participating in or academic events, does that not influence the decision for the judge?
So I think it does, but not in the way that maybe you're saying it. So the court's not going to say, "Hey, little Smith, little Sue, where do you want to go to school?" They're going to say, "All right, mom and dad, what are your arguments about the school?" Right? And if mom's saying, "This is where the child is saying she wants to go to school, and here's all the reasons why I support that," then that is where the court's going to get an understanding of what the child wants, but it's not going to be the determining factor. The court still has to make an independent decision about the child's best interest, regardless of what the child is saying they want to do.
So they do get seen and heard, but it makes sense on how they conclude and decide who gets to decide where the child goes to school. Let's wrap this up with one last question. For fathers who anticipate a disagreement about school choice, what documentation or preparation tends to carry the most weight in court?
So do your research, right? Make sure the school that you are trying to push forward is the best school for your child, is the best school for your child, right? If it's just coming down to it's the most convenient school for you, that, based on maybe your neighborhood or something like that, or your commute, that's not going to be sufficient. You really need to make sure that the school that you're pushing is in your child's best interest. So the best academic, extracurricular, et cetera, record that you're able to put forward about that school, the more likely the court is inclined to say, okay, this parent gets to make the final decision about the school based on how they are presenting the kind of thought process and what they're going through to determine where their child goes to school.
Well said. Thank you so much for your insights today again, Jana. That's it for today's episode of Advocating for Dads. If you're facing a dispute over school placement or educational decisions in North Carolina, visit lawofficeofjkj.com to schedule a consultation with Jana and her team. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing videos like this one.